Animals like you don't belong in first class. Flight attendant Victoria Wilson slapped Olivia Harrington hard across the face. The impact sent Olivia's head snapping to the side. That's what thieves get. Victoria sneered, snatching Olivia's boarding pass and ripping it into pieces. She threw the torn paper at Olivia's feet like garbage. Get on your knees and pick up your fake ticket, Victoria commanded, pointing at the floor. Then crawl back to economy where you belong. The first-class cabin of SkyWest Airlines Flight 823 fell silent. 30 passengers watched with phones recording as Olivia dressed in simple jeans with a small tear at the knee. A plain white t-shirt and worn sneakers stood frozen with a red handprint on her dark cheek. Someone whispered, "Finally, someone is handling these scammers properly." In 8 minutes, this flight attendant would learn she had just assaulted the woman who owned the entire airline. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice destroy them in the most spectacular way possible? 3:52 p.m. Departure in 25 minutes. Olivia remained standing, her cheeks still stinging from the slap. She didn't kneel, didn't move toward the scattered paper fragments. The red handprint on her dark skin seemed to fuel Victoria's escalating rage. "Did you not hear me?" Victoria's voice rose to a shriek that carried through the entire cabin. "I said, get on your knees and pick up your fake garbage." She grabbed Olivia's shoulders with both hands and tried to force her down. When Olivia resisted standing firm, Victoria shoved her hard against the leather seat. "You're making this worse for yourself," Victoria snarled, jabbing her finger into Olivia's chest. "Criminals like you always do." The word criminals hung in the air like poison gas. "Security, we have a violent passenger refusing to comply with direct orders." The commotion drew every eye in first class. Passenger Amanda Blake, a lifestyle influencer with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, immediately started live streaming from seat 1B, her phone perfectly positioned to capture the drama. "Oh my God, you guys," Amanda whispered into her phone camera, her voice dripping with performative concern. "There's literally a scammer in first class right now trying to steal someone's seat. The flight attendant is handling it absolutely perfectly." Her live stream counter showed 847 viewers and climbing rapidly. Comments flooded the screen in real time. Finally, someone with backbone. "Good. These people always try this scam. Why don't they just follow simple rules? Love that attendant. Zero tolerance. Should call police immediately." Manager Thomas Reynolds appeared slightly out of breath from running down the jet bridge. At 48, he carried himself with the aggressive authority of someone who'd seen everything in 20 years of airline management and wasn't impressed by anything anymore. "What's the situation here, Victoria?" He didn't even glance at Olivia, treating her like furniture. "Attempted seat fraud, sir." She refused to produce any valid identification and became immediately combative and threatening when I tried to verify her obviously fake ticket. Reynolds finally looked at Olivia, his eyes scanning her simple outfit with obvious disgust and contempt. Jeans with a small tear at the knee that suggested financial struggle, basic white t-shirt from a discount store, scuffed sneakers that had clearly seen many hard miles. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and government-issued photo identification immediately. No delays." "She already destroyed my boarding pass," Olivia said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. Victoria let out a harsh, mocking laugh that made several passengers chuckle, because any blind person could see it was obviously fake. "Look at her, Thomas. Does she honestly look like she belongs in a $2,000 first-class seat?" The passengers in nearby seats nodded in vigorous agreement. An elderly man in an expensive three-piece suit and gold watch muttered loud enough for everyone to hear disgraceful behavior. Absolutely disgraceful. In my day, people knew their proper place in society. His wife clutched her designer purse tighter and whispered, "I don't feel safe with her on this plane." Olivia's mind flashed back to another flight, another time. She was 19, wearing her best outfit. A simple skirt suit bought secondhand for her Stanford scholarship interview. The white businessman next to her received a complimentary drink while the flight attendant pretended not to hear Olivia's request for water. When she persisted, the attendant accused her of being disruptive. "I have a right to the same service," 19-year-old Olivia had said quietly. "You have the right to leave this aircraft if you can't behave appropriately," the captain had announced over the intercom. 2 air marshals removed her from the plane. She missed her interview. The scholarship went to someone else. That night, in a cheap airport hotel room, paid for with her last bit of savings, Olivia had called her father in tears. "They didn't even see me, Daddy," she had sobbed. "They just saw my skin." Jackson Harrington, a man who had marched with Dr. King and spent his life fighting for equality, had sighed deeply. "This world makes black folks invisible until they need someone to blame. Then suddenly we're all too visible. I'll never let anyone make me invisible again," Olivia had promised. The memory shifted to her tiny apartment during college. While her classmates partied, Olivia worked 3 jobs. Studying by lamplight at 2 a.m. after an 8-hour restaurant shift. The business plan she'd developed instead of going home for Christmas. The startup she launched from her dorm room that caught an investor's eye. A warm summer evening flashed into focus. Olivia sat beside her father's hospital bed, his once powerful frame now frail from cancer. Jackson Harrington pressed his old Air Force wings pin into her palm. "The next generation shouldn't have to fight the same battles, Livy," he had whispered, his voice weak but resolute. "Change comes from the inside. Find a way in." "I promise, Daddy," she had said, clutching his hand as he slipped away. Another memory. Olivia at 32, alone in her apartment after closing a major acquisition deal. On her laptop screen, financial reports showing her secret systematic purchase of SkyWest Airlines stock through various investment vehicles. The board never saw her coming. "I'm coming for you, Daddy," she had whispered, touching the wings pin she kept with her always. "I'm going to change it from the inside." Her final memory last night in her hotel room packing for this flight. A framed photo of her father on the nightstand. The decision to dress casually to experience the airline as an ordinary passenger would. This was her 24th undercover inspection, part of a comprehensive audit she had initiated. The memories faded as Officer Martinez approached, hand on his cuffs. Olivia touched the wings pin in her pocket. Her father's legacy. Her purpose. Victoria Wilson hadn't always been this person. 30 years ago, at 22, she had joined SkyWest with genuine enthusiasm, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her smile bright and sincere. She had loved the idea of helping people, of making their journeys comfortable and pleasant. "You're a natural," her first supervisor had told her after watching her calm and anxious child. "You have a gift for making people feel safe." The first cracks in Victoria's compassion appeared during the post-9/11 security panic. Suddenly, every suspicious passenger was a potential threat. Training sessions emphasized vigilance and profile recognition, thinly veiled code for racial profiling. 8 years ago, Victoria had been attacked by a passenger who had indeed been trying to use a fraudulent ticket. He had grabbed her arm so hard, it fractured when she questioned his documentation. 3 months of physical therapy and a permanent ache in her wrist when it rained served as constant reminders to stay vigilant. "You should have spotted him sooner," her manager at the time had said, more concerned about the company's liability than her injury. "That's your job, to keep the frauds out." The real turning point came 2 years ago. Victoria's husband Michael lost his job and their medical insurance with it. His diabetes required expensive medication. Their son's college tuition bills were mounting. Victoria's SkyWest salary became the family's sole support. Since then, SkyWest had implemented increasingly aggressive fraud prevention protocols. Staff received quarterly bonuses for identifying and removing ticketing irregularities. Their performance evaluations prominently featured security detection metrics. Last month, Victoria had received a written warning for insufficient fraud prevention, her first in nearly 3 decades of service. 3 more fraud incidents in your cabin, and you'll be suspended without pay, Thomas Reynolds had told her during her last review, pointing to the section of the employee manual titled Zero Tolerance Enforcement. Last night she had lain awake calculating bills. Michael's insulin costs, Jason's tuition payment, The mortgage that was already 2 weeks late. The collection agency calls she'd been dodging. So when she saw Olivia Harrington, black casual clothes, old shoes, her internal alarm had sounded immediately. All she saw was a potential fraud detection to add to her monthly quota, another point toward keeping her job. Victoria's hand still tingled from the slap she had delivered. Some small voice deep inside the remnant of that enthusiastic 22-year-old whispered that she had gone too far. But she silenced it quickly. In this job, in this economy, you couldn't afford doubt. Thomas Reynolds watched the unfolding drama with thinly veiled satisfaction. His region had the highest fraud detection rates in the entire SkyWest network for 3 quarters running. Each removed passenger represented another data point for his next performance review, another step toward the VP position he'd been pursuing for years. "I run a tight operation," he often boasted to colleagues. No exceptions, no excuses. Beneath Reynolds's confident exterior lurked constant anxiety. The aviation industry was volatile. Layoffs were common. At 48, with 2 failed marriages and substantial alimony payments, he couldn't afford to lose his position. His worth as a man had become inextricably linked to his corporate success, a narrative he reinforced with expensive watches, tailored suits, and aggressive leadership. His carefully curated management style emphasized efficiency over empathy, metrics over human experience. Reynolds had developed a system for training flight attendants to spot statistical irregularities, a euphemism for passengers who didn't fit the first-class profile based primarily on appearance and behavior patterns. What he never mentioned in his corporate presentations was how those irregularities disproportionately targeted certain demographic groups. That wasn't his concern. The numbers were what mattered, and his numbers were excellent. Captain Richard Gonzalez, a 30-year veteran with silver temples and a distinguished bearing, emerged from the cockpit drawn by the commotion. At 60, he commanded immediate respect with his decorated uniform, displaying decades of service awards. "What's the delay, Thomas?" he asked, eyeing the gathering crowd with concern. "We're on a tight schedule. Just removing a fraud attempt," Captain Reynolds replied confidently. Victoria caught someone trying to sneak into first class with fake documentation. Gonzalez glanced briefly at Olivia, but made no effort to assess the situation independently. Throughout his long career, he had learned to trust his crew implicitly. "The frontline staff knows best," he often said. If Victoria and Thomas said there was a problem, then there was a problem. Behind his professional demeanor, Gonzalez harbored his own insecurities. His retirement was just 2 years away. His pension depended on maintaining a perfect safety and compliance record until then. Rocking the boat, questioning established procedures, or challenging subordinates risked complications he couldn't afford this close to the finish line. "Handle it quickly," he instructed. "We need to depart on schedule." Standing slightly behind Victoria was Maria Ramirez, a junior flight attendant, just 4 months into the job. At 24, with warm brown eyes and a gentle demeanor, she had joined SkyWest to help pay off her student loans while pursuing a nursing degree at night. Maria watched the confrontation with growing discomfort. During training, she had noticed how the fraud detection examples overwhelmingly featured passengers of color, though this was never explicitly acknowledged. She had questioned this once and been told, "We're not discussing demographics. We're discussing behaviors." Now, seeing Olivia's dignified composure in the face of such hostility, Maria felt a twisting in her stomach. This didn't feel right. But as a probationary employee, still paying off $50,000 in student debt, she remained silent. Her younger sister's upcoming surgery demanded that Maria keep this job at all costs. She thought of her grandmother's advice. "Keep your head down. Don't make waves. That's how we survive." But another voice, her own conscience, whispered that survival without dignity wasn't really living. Olivia reached slowly into her messenger bag while Officer Martinez kept his hand positioned near his weapon. The entire first-class cabin held its collective breath as she withdrew a worn leather portfolio that had clearly seen years of important use. "Ma'am, absolutely no sudden movements," Martinez warned, his voice tense with authority and caution. Olivia opened the portfolio with deliberate, methodical calm. The first document she revealed was a laminated identification badge that caught and reflected the overhead cabin lights with official authenticity. Reynolds squinted at the badge from several feet away, trying to read the small print. His face went completely devastatingly white as the words became clear. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the cabin noise. The badge read in bold official lettering, "Olivia Harrington, majority owner and chairperson, SkyWest Airlines." Victoria's triumphant expression froze mid-sneer, like a photograph capturing the exact moment of realization. That's obviously fake too. Anyone with a computer can make fake identification badges nowadays. But Olivia wasn't finished revealing her credentials. She withdrew a second document with practiced precision. Thick official corporate letterhead with the SkyWest Airlines logo embossed in genuine gold leaf that was impossible to counterfeit. "This is my official appointment letter," Olivia said, with unnatural calm, holding the document up for everyone in the cabin to examine closely. "Signed personally by the chairman of the board of directors, dated January 15, 2021. Formally appointing me, Olivia Harrington, as majority owner and chairperson of SkyWest Airlines, effective immediately." Reynolds's official radio fell from his suddenly trembling hand, clattering loudly to the aircraft floor like dropped metal. Captain Gonzalez pushed forward, snatching the appointment document directly from Olivia's hands with desperate urgency. His experienced eyes scanned the official corporate seals, the impossible-to-forge watermarks, the precise legal language that would be completely impossible to fake convincingly. His weathered face drained of absolutely all color, turning ashen and gray. This simply cannot be real," he stammered, his voice cracking with disbelief and growing terror. "There's no way this is authentic." Amanda Blake's live stream exploded into complete digital chaos. The comment section went absolutely insane with shocked reactions. "Holy sh! Is this actually real? No way. No way. The owner. They're all getting fired right now. This is the greatest plot twist in history. I'm literally screaming." Karma is beautiful. Her viewer count hit 25,000 and was climbing exponentially by the second as people shared the stream across every social media platform imaginable. Olivia calmly retrieved her personal phone and deliberately dialed a number she knew by heart, putting the call on speakerphone so every person in the cabin could hear clearly. The professional ringtone echoed through the completely silent aircraft cabin. Janet Parker speaking, executive office of the chairperson, SkyWest Airlines. "Hello, Janet. This is Olivia calling from the field. I'm currently experiencing some difficulties on Flight 823 to Chicago. Could you please officially confirm my identity for the crew and passengers who seem to be having trouble believing my credentials?" A brief professional pause. "Of course, Ms. Harrington. Ladies and gentlemen, you are speaking with Olivia Harrington, majority owner and chairperson of SkyWest Airlines, officially appointed by the board of directors in January 2021. She's traveling today as part of her ongoing operational review program." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Victoria Wilson's breakdown was total and complete. Her entire body trembled as the full implications of her actions crashed over her in devastating waves. The enormity of what she had done, physically assaulting the owner of SkyWest Airlines on camera in front of witnesses while being live-streamed to tens of thousands of viewers, was too much to process. "My husband's medicine," she whispered through her tears. "Our mortgage. My son's tuition." Each word emerged between broken sobs as she mentally cataloged everything she was about to lose. 3 decades of employment, her retirement benefits, her healthcare coverage, her professional reputation, all vanishing in the space of a single slap. She flashed back to this morning's argument with her husband. Just 1 more year, he'd pleaded. Then my medical benefits kick in at my new job. But they wouldn't have that year now. Because of one moment, one terrible impulsive action born of desperation and bias, everything they'd worked for was gone. Victoria slumped against the galley wall, no longer the confident enforcer, but a terrified woman, facing catastrophic personal consequences. Thomas Reynolds, meanwhile, maintained his composure through sheer force of will, though sweat now beaded visibly on his forehead. Unlike Victoria's emotional collapse, his crisis manifested as frantic calculation, running through scenarios, crafting explanations, looking for escape routes. Ms. Harrington. He began, his voice artificially calm, despite the tremor in his hands. There's clearly been a serious procedural breakdown. I assure you this incident does not reflect our standard operating procedures or training protocols. Victoria's actions were completely unauthorized and— Stop! Olivia's single word cut through Reynolds' attempt to distance himself. Those protocols exist in writing, Mr. Reynolds. I've seen the fraud detection guidelines you personally championed and implemented across the region. Reynolds paled, further his carefully constructed narrative collapsing. His eyes darted around the cabin seeking allies and finding none. The VP position he'd coveted now seemed laughably out of reach. More likely he'd be lucky to avoid criminal charges. His mind raced to his ex-wives, the alimony payments, the empty apartment where he returned each night to drink alone. His identity had been built entirely around corporate success. Without that, who was he? Captain Gonzalez's reaction differed from both his colleagues. Decades of crisis management training kicked in his face, settling into a mask of professional neutrality, even as panic churned beneath. Ms. Harrington. He began as captain of this aircraft. I take full responsibility for all crew actions. While I wasn't personally involved in this incident, the chain of command is clear. I should have verified the situation before supporting the removal process. His words sounded rehearsed, as if drawn from the emergency PR situations section of the training manual. But behind the formula, genuine fear showed in his eyes. 2 years from retirement, his pension now hung by a thread. Gonzalez thought of his wife, who had endured decades of his absence while raising their children. The retirement home in Arizona they'd put a deposit on last month. The grandchildren he'd finally have time to know, all potentially gone because of one passenger he'd never bothered to look at properly. Maria Ramirez stood slightly apart, her expression a complex mixture of horror and unexpectedly relief. As the newest crew member, with the least responsibility for the systematic discrimination, she might survive this catastrophe. More importantly, the uncomfortable reality she'd sensed but couldn't articulate was finally being exposed. I knew something was wrong, she whispered more to herself than anyone else. I should have said something. Olivia caught the comment. Sometimes knowing isn't enough, Ms. Ramirez. Doing is what matters. Maria nodded, shame and determination mingling in her expression. Her grandmother's advice about keeping her head down had protected the family for generations. But at what cost to their dignity, to their humanity? Before we proceed further, Olivia said, her voice cutting through the tension, I want everyone to understand exactly what happened here today. This wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was the predictable outcome of systematic discrimination embedded in company policy and practice. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a document labeled Fraud Detection Protocol, SkyWest Airlines, its pages marked with yellow highlighter. This is the official company guideline for identifying suspicious passengers, she explained. Note the criteria listed on page 4. Appearance, inconsistent with cabin class. Behavior patterns that deviate from typical first-class passenger profiles. Hesitation when questioned about fare class or reservation details. She looked directly at Reynolds. What these seemingly neutral phrases actually mean in practice is, does this person look like they can afford first class? And the unstated assumption is that black passengers in casual clothing, or passengers who don't display certain class markers, don't look right in premium cabins. Reynolds swallowed hard but couldn't meet her gaze. The results speak for themselves. Olivia continued, pulling out a statistical report. Passengers of color are 378% more likely to be questioned about ticket validity than white passengers. They're 412% more likely to be asked for additional identification. They're 503% more likely to be removed from flights for disruptive behavior, despite identical conduct from white passengers being tolerated or ignored. The numbers hit the cabin like physical blows. Amanda Blake's live stream comments exploded with outrage. Those statistics are horrifying. This is systematic racism exposed live. How is this legal in 2023? Sue them for everything. This is why I drive everywhere. Olivia continued pulling out a series of internal memos. These documents show that SkyWest implemented a fraud detection incentive program 3 years ago that directly rewarded employees for identifying and removing passengers they deemed suspicious. The program disproportionately targeted non-white passengers by using appearance and behavior patterns inconsistent with cabin class as primary indicators. As she spoke, Olivia felt a mixture of emotions swirling beneath her professional exterior. Vindication, certainly, but also a deep sadness that this evidence was necessary at all, that her father's warnings about institutional racism remained as relevant today as they had been decades ago. She thought of the countless passengers who had been humiliated without cameras recording, without owning the airline, without the power to implement consequences. Her anger wasn't just for herself, but for all of them. Under Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 382, the Air Carrier Access Act, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What has occurred here today, and apparently for years, constitutes multiple federal violations, each carrying potential criminal charges. Victoria looked up from her sobbing. Criminal charges: physical assault of a passenger, destruction of valid travel documents, discrimination based on race and perceived economic status, filing false reports with law enforcement. Each violation carries a potential sentence of up to 2 years in federal prison. Officer Martinez stepped forward uncomfortably. Ms. Harrington, if you want to press charges, we'll need to discuss that immediately. We'll discuss that momentarily, Olivia replied. But first, I want everyone to understand exactly what systematic discrimination costs. She produced her final document, Financial Impact Analysis, Discrimination at SkyWest Airlines. SkyWest generated $8.7 billion in total revenue last year. Our profit margins operate on extremely tight calculations, where every incident, every lawsuit, every public relations disaster directly impacts shareholder value. Reynolds was still frantically trying to reach someone through his radio, but it had gone ominously silent. Discrimination lawsuits in the airline industry cost an average of $2.3 million per individual incident. That includes legal fees, settlements, punitive damages, and regulatory fines. She paused, letting the financial implications sink in, while Amanda's live stream audience hit 65,000 viewers. Social media incidents of this magnitude typically reduce stock value by an average of 4.2% within the first 24 hours. Based on our current market capitalization, that represents approximately $620 million in immediate shareholder losses. Captain Gonzalez's face went gray as he calculated his pension disappearing in real time. Inwardly, Olivia felt a surge of guilt. Was she being too harsh, too calculating? Her father had always counseled compassion alongside justice. But she also remembered his other teaching systems don't change without consequences. She took a deep breath, centering herself. This wasn't personal vengeance. It was necessary accountability. Without real consequences, nothing would change. Olivia's phone rang. The screen displayed Secretary of Transportation, United States Government. She answered on speaker. Ms. Harrington. This is Secretary Johnson. The Department of Transportation is prepared to launch a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices across all major airlines. We'd like your cooperation. You have it completely, Secretary Johnson. But I'm announcing immediate changes that won't wait for federal investigations. Time's up, Olivia announced, looking directly at Victoria Reynolds and Captain Gonzalez. I'm going to give everyone in this cabin a choice right now in front of 90,000 live stream viewers. The cabin fell dead silent except for Victoria's quiet sobbing. Ms. Wilson. Mr. Reynolds. Captain Gonzalez. You have exactly 2 options. I'm going to explain both choices clearly, and you're going to make your decision immediately. Reynolds tried to speak, but no words came out. Option 1. Immediate suspension without pay. Pending full federal investigation. Mandatory 120 hours of sensitivity training and bias education. Public written apology to be published in major newspapers and social media. Permanent notation in your personnel files. Probationary employment status for a minimum of 2 years. The crew members looked at each other in horror. Option 2. Immediate termination for cause with permanent ban from all airline industry employment. Personal legal liability for all corporate damages, including stock losses, legal fees, and punitive damages. Federal criminal charges filed for civil rights violations. Public testimony required in all related discrimination lawsuits. Olivia checked her watch. You have 30 seconds to decide. As the seconds ticked by, Olivia's resolve wavered momentarily. These people's livelihoods hung in the balance. Victoria had a sick husband. Reynolds, for all his flaws, was supporting 2 ex-families. Gonzalez was near retirement. But then she thought of the thousands of passengers who had been humiliated, removed, even arrested, because of policies these people had implemented and enforced. Where was the concern for their livelihoods, their dignity, their well-being? Victoria spoke first, her voice breaking. Option 1. Please, I choose option 1. I have children to support. Captain Gonzalez nodded frantically. Option 1. Absolutely option 1. Reynolds looked around desperately, as if searching for escape routes that didn't exist. Option 1, he whispered. Excellent choice, Olivia said coldly. Those decisions are now part of the public record witnessed by 90,000 people and recorded for legal purposes. She turned to address Amanda's live stream camera directly. But this isn't just about individual accountability. This is about systematic change throughout the entire airline industry. Olivia's phone rang again. This time she showed the caller ID to the camera Secretary of Transportation, United States Government. She answered on speaker. Ms. Harrington, this is Secretary Johnson. The Department of Transportation is prepared to launch a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices across all major airlines. We'd like your cooperation. You have it completely. Secretary Johnson, but I'm announcing immediate changes that won't wait for federal investigations. Olivia looked directly into Amanda's camera. Effective immediately. SkyWest Airlines will implement the following mandatory reforms. First, every crew member will complete 40 hours of unconscious bias training within 60 days or face termination. Second, we're launching a passenger rights mobile app that allows real-time reporting of discrimination with automatic corporate review. Third, every discrimination incident will trigger immediate investigation by our new Office of Passenger Equity, headed by civil rights attorneys. Fourth, we're establishing a $65 million annual fund for diversity initiatives and discrimination prevention programs. Fifth, executive bonuses for all management will now be tied directly to discrimination, incident reduction, and passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers. The live stream audience was cheering virtually. Comments flooded in. Yes. Systemic change. This is how you use power for good. Every airline needs to do this. Queen behavior. Olivia felt a complex mix of emotions as she announced these changes. Pride in taking decisive action. Doubt about whether it would be enough. Sorrow that such measures were necessary at all. Her father had always said that true change required both accountability and vision consequences for past actions and a clear path forward. She was trying to honor both principles. As Victoria, Reynolds, and Gonzalez were escorted from the aircraft, their faces masks of humiliation and defeat, Amanda's live stream captured their exit for posterity. Her viewer count had reached 100,000. The departure board updated Flight 823 new crew boarding. Departure in 30 minutes. Maria Ramirez approached Olivia hesitantly. Ms. Harrington, if I may, I should have spoken up sooner. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid to lose my job. Olivia studied the young woman thoughtfully. Fear is a powerful silencer, Maria. The question is, what will you do now that you've seen the consequences of silence? Maria straightened her posture. I want to be part of the solution, whatever that takes. Then you're the only crew member who'll remain on this flight, Olivia decided. And when we land, I'd like you to join the team developing our new training protocols. We need people who understand both sides of this problem. As a replacement crew began boarding the aircraft, Olivia noticed Dr. Wilson approaching, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and contrition. Ms. Harrington, he began awkwardly. I behaved abominably. There's no excuse for my comments or attitude. You're right. There isn't. Olivia agreed. But the question is, what will you do differently now that you've witnessed the consequences of casual prejudice? Wilson looked genuinely thoughtful. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Olivia nodded. That's a start at least. As the flight prepared to finally depart, Olivia felt the weight of her father's wings pin in her pocket. Change from the inside, she whispered to herself. It was happening, but at what personal cost? For the first time since the confrontation began, she allowed herself to feel the sting of the slap, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal, the emotional toll of fighting battles her father had fought decades ago. A single tear escaped before she quickly wiped it away. There would be time for processing later. Right now, a revolution was beginning, and she needed to guide it. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 823, Olivia Harrington sat in the SkyWest boardroom, facing an unexpected challenge to her reform agenda. The initial shock had worn off, and institutional resistance was emerging. Ms. Harrington, while we all agree, changes are necessary. Board member Richard Coleman argued, the scope and expense of your proposals are frankly unsustainable. The shareholders are concerned about overreaction. Olivia studied the 5 board members who had requested this emergency meeting. All white men over 60. All visibly uncomfortable with the pace and depth of her reforms. Overreaction. She repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Is that how you characterize addressing systematic discrimination that has harmed thousands of passengers and exposed us to millions in legal liability? Coleman shifted in his expensive chair. We simply suggest a more measured approach. The training program alone will cost over $12 million to implement. And how much did our stock lose in the first 48 hours after the incident? Olivia countered. Over $480 million. How many discrimination lawsuits are currently pending against SkyWest 73, with potential damages exceeding $140 million? She leaned forward. This isn't charity, gentlemen. It's risk management. William Montgomery, the chairman who had supported her initial appointment, attempted mediation. Perhaps we could phase in the reforms over a longer period. 5 years instead of 1. Absolutely not. Olivia's tone left no room for negotiation. Every day we delay is another day passengers face discrimination. Another day we risk incidents, lawsuits, and brand damage. She tapped her tablet, sending files to the boardroom display. These are resignation letters I've prepared for each of you. I own 37% of this airline. With the support of 2 major institutional investors who have already pledged their votes to my reform agenda, I have effective control of the board. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I don't want to replace you. Olivia continued, her tone softening slightly. Your experience is valuable, but if you cannot support these necessary changes, I will find board members who can. Coleman's face flushed with anger. This is coercion. This is governance, Olivia corrected. As chairperson, my responsibility is to the long-term health of this company, which includes both financial performance and ethical operations. For a moment, she saw her father in her mind's eye. Would he approve of these hardball tactics? His voice seemed to whisper, systems don't change by asking politely, Livy. After a tense silence, Montgomery spoke. What specific outcomes are you expecting from these reforms, Ms. Harrington? If we're investing these resources, what metrics will demonstrate success? This was progress moving from resistance to implementation questions. Excellent question. Olivia pulled up a new slide. Here are our target metrics. Discrimination complaints reduced by 80% within 12 months. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers increased by 50%. Employee retention improved by 35%. And most importantly, to this group's stock price recovery to pre-incident levels within 6 months. For the next 2 hours, the discussion shifted from whether to implement reforms to how to implement them effectively. By meeting's end, the board had reluctantly approved her full agenda, though Coleman still registered his objection for the record. As the members filed out, Montgomery lingered. "That was forceful, Olivia." "It was necessary," she replied. Institutional resistance is always the biggest obstacle to meaningful change. True enough, he conceded. But be careful. Corporate politics can be brutal, especially when you're challenging both profit models and personal biases simultaneously. Olivia smiled tightly. "I grew up black in America, William. I'm quite familiar with brutality, both institutional and personal." After he left, Olivia remained alone in the boardroom, suddenly exhausted. The constant fighting was taking a toll. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her personal life, already limited, had become non-existent. Even her closest friends had received only brief texts explaining her absence. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a text from her best friend Zoe. "Girl, when are you coming up for air? Worried about you." Olivia hadn't even responded. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she pushing too hard, too fast? Was she sacrificing her own well-being for institutional change that might not last? Her phone rang, interrupting these thoughts. It was Maria Ramirez. "Ms. Harrington, we've completed the first draft of the new training protocol," the young woman reported excitedly. "We incorporated input from civil rights organizations and passengers who've experienced discrimination. It's really going to make a difference." Maria's enthusiasm was infectious. "The Flight Attendants Union has concerns, of course, but they're willing to work with us, as long as we acknowledge that many discriminatory practices were driven by corporate policies, not individual bias." "That's fair," Olivia agreed. "This isn't about blaming frontline staff. It's about changing the system that shaped their behavior." After finishing the call, Olivia felt her resolve strengthen. The doubts hadn't disappeared, but they were balanced by reminders of why this work mattered. She picked up her father's wings pin from the table, where she'd placed it during the meeting. "Systems don't change by asking politely," she repeated to herself. But they do change. Outside the boardroom window, she could see SkyWest aircraft taking off and landing, each one carrying hundreds of passengers who deserved dignity, regardless of their appearance, accent, or attire. The work continued. 2 months after the incident, Olivia found herself face-to-face with Victoria Wilson for the first time since Flight 823. They sat in a small conference room at SkyWest headquarters, the tension palpable. Victoria looked markedly different. Her previously bottle blonde hair now showed natural gray at the roots. The harsh makeup was gone, replaced by a more natural appearance. Most noticeably, the aggressive confidence had vanished, replaced by a wary humility. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Harrington." Victoria began, her voice slightly hoarse. I didn't expect you would. I believe in second chances, Ms. Wilson, but I also believe in accountability." Olivia kept her tone neutral, professional. Victoria nodded, hands fidgeting with a folder on her lap. "I've completed the first phase of sensitivity training. It's been illuminating, painful, but necessary." "How so?" Olivia asked, genuinely curious about Victoria's experience. Victoria considered the question carefully. "I've had to confront how many assumptions I make based on appearance, how those assumptions shaped my behavior, how I justified discrimination as just doing my job." She paused, struggling with emotion. "The hardest part was recognizing that I wasn't just following orders. I was enforcing biases I didn't want to admit I had." Olivia was surprised by Victoria's self-awareness. She had expected defensiveness, excuses, maybe performative remorse, but not this level of genuine reflection. "My husband watched the video," Victoria continued. "He was horrified. Asked me if that was really who I'd become." Tears formed in her eyes. I didn't have an answer for him. The conversation shifted as Victoria explained her family's situation. Her husband's medical needs had deteriorated. Their son had taken a semester off college to work and help with expenses. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Victoria clarified quickly. Just explaining, not excusing. Olivia nodded, understanding the distinction. And how has the suspension affected your perspective on the job? I miss the work, the real work of helping passengers, ensuring safety, creating positive experiences. I don't miss the person I became under the pressure to detect fraud. Victoria looked directly at Olivia. I want to make amends not just to you, but to everyone I've mistreated. Olivia studied the woman across from her. The transformation seemed genuine, but was it enough? Victoria. I didn't schedule this meeting just to hear your reflections. I have a proposition for you. Victoria looked up surprised. We're developing a comprehensive training program on passenger dignity and bias recognition. We need someone who understands both sides, someone who enforced discriminatory policies and now recognizes their harm. Victoria's eyes widened. You want me to help with training? I want you to lead it, Olivia clarified. No one can speak more powerfully about the dangers of bias than someone who has confronted their own. For the first time, Victoria showed a flash of her old confidence. I could do that. I've been documenting everything from the training process, things that worked, things that didn't. Insights that might help others recognize patterns I missed for years. As they discussed the details, Olivia found herself reflecting on her father's teachings about redemption. Justice, without the possibility of growth, isn't justice, he had often said. It's just punishment. Later that week, Olivia had a very different confrontation with Thomas Reynolds. Unlike Victoria's journey toward accountability, Reynolds had retreated into bitter resentment. You've destroyed my career to make yourself look good, he accused, sitting stiffly in the same conference room. 30 years of service reduced to one incident. One incident, Olivia repeated incredulously. Mr. Reynolds, under your management, passenger removals increased 340%, with minority passengers accounting for 78% of removals. That's not one incident. That's systematic discrimination institutionalized under your leadership. Reynolds looked away. I was implementing corporate metrics. Everyone wanted fraud detection numbers. I delivered. At what human cost? Olivia pressed. How many passengers were humiliated, delayed, even arrested because they didn't look right to your staff? Unlike Victoria, Reynolds showed no recognition of the harm his policies had caused. His concern remained focused entirely on his own career prospects. What do you want from me? He finally asked. You've already demoted me to glorified baggage handler. I want you to understand why your approach was fundamentally wrong, not just legally or financially, but morally. Olivia leaned forward. But I'm not sure you're capable of that understanding. Reynolds's expression hardened. You think you're changing the world, Ms. Harrington, but you're just creating new forms of discrimination. Now it's open season on anyone enforcing standards. Olivia recognized the futility of continuing. Some people could not or would not recognize their role in oppressive systems. They saw accountability as persecution, equality as reverse discrimination. We're done here, Mr. Reynolds. You may return to your duties. After he left, Olivia sat alone, troubled by the contrast between Victoria and Reynolds. Same company, same policies, but dramatically different capacity for growth and change. It reminded her that systems were made of people, people with varying degrees of awareness, empathy, and willingness to evolve. Changing policies was necessary, but insufficient. Real transformation required reaching hearts and minds, a much more complex challenge. She thought of her father again. You can legislate behavior, he often said, but conscience requires conversion. These personal confrontations, some encouraging others, disheartening, reinforced the complexity of the work ahead. Institutional change wasn't just about new policies. It was about human transformation, one person at a time. That evening, Olivia finally responded to her friend Zoe's text. Free for dinner Friday. I need to remember who I am outside this fight. Balance was necessary not just for her well-being, but for the sustainability of the changes she sought to create. The revolution would continue, but it didn't have to consume her entirely. 4 months after the incident on Flight 823, the transformation that began at SkyWest had expanded beyond a single airline, creating ripple effects throughout the transportation industry. But alongside growing support, emerged powerful resistance from entrenched interests. Olivia sat in a Washington, D.C. conference room, preparing for testimony before the Senate Transportation Committee. Through the window, she could see protesters gathered outside the Capitol building, some supporting the proposed Transportation Equity Act, inspired by her reforms, others vehemently opposing it. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Trans-American Airlines CEO calls Harrington, reforms regulatory overreach, and costly virtue signaling. Olivia wasn't surprised. Richard Daniels, CEO of Trans-American, had emerged as her most vocal opponent, rallying industry executives against what he termed expensive social engineering that undermines operational efficiency. Janet Parker, Olivia's chief of staff, reviewed last-minute briefing notes. Daniels will be testifying after you. Our sources say he's bringing statistics claiming discrimination complaints represent less than 0.01% of passenger interactions. Convenient how they define what counts as a complaint, Olivia noted dryly. Did they include all the passengers removed without incident reports? All the people who were too intimidated to file formal complaints? Exactly our counter-argument, Janet confirmed. Plus the independent audit showing Trans-American has the worst record of racial disparities in passenger removals, 573% higher for passengers of color versus white passengers with identical documentation issues. The committee hearing began with Senator James Mitchell, a conservative known for opposition to regulatory expansion, setting a confrontational tone. Ms. Harrington, he began after preliminaries. While your personal experience was undoubtedly distressing, isn't it excessive to impose industry-wide regulations based on one isolated incident? Olivia leaned toward the microphone. With respect, Senator, what happened to me was far from isolated. Our investigation uncovered 247 similar incidents at SkyWest alone during the previous 18 months, and those are just the documented cases. She presented the committee with data from 6 major airlines, showing consistent patterns of discriminatory treatment. This isn't about one incident or one airline. It's about a pervasive industry practice that violates federal civil rights protections. Senator Lisa Wong, who had co-sponsored the Transportation Equity Act, followed up. Ms. Harrington opponents claim these regulations will cost the industry billions. How do you respond? The industry is already paying those billions. Senator and lawsuit settlements, negative publicity, customer abandonment, and brand damage. What we're proposing simply redirects those costs toward prevention rather than compensation after harm occurs. Olivia presented a financial analysis showing the business case for reform, how SkyWest's stock had not only recovered from its post-incident drop, but had gained an additional 12% as the market responded positively to the company's proactive approach. Throughout her testimony, Olivia maintained the same calm dignity she had shown during the original confrontation. No matter how hostile the questioning, she responded with facts, data, and measured reasoning rather than emotion. When Richard Daniels testified afterward, his approach contrasted sharply with Olivia's evidence-based presentation. He focused on hypothetical scenarios, anecdotal examples, and appeals to operational freedom. These so-called Harrington standards will create regulatory nightmares, he insisted. Airlines need flexibility to protect legitimate passengers from fraud and security threats. Senator Wong pounced on his choice of words. Mr. Daniels, you said legitimate passengers. Could you clarify what makes a passenger legitimate in your view? Daniels looked momentarily flustered. I simply meant passengers with valid documentation and appropriate behavior. And how do your staff determine what constitutes appropriate behavior? Wong pressed. Well, there are certain patterns that Daniels stopped himself recognizing the trap. We train our staff to follow objective standards. Yet your airline has the highest rate of removal disparities based on race, Wong noted. If your standards are truly objective, how do you explain that outcome? The exchange continued, with Daniels growing increasingly defensive as Wong methodically exposed the contradictions in Trans-American's approach. Outside the hearing room, public opinion was similarly divided. The Transportation Equity Act had strong support from civil rights organizations, consumer advocacy groups, and a growing coalition of businesses that recognize the market advantages of inclusive practices. Opposition came from traditional industry associations, conservative think tanks, arguing against government overreach, and a vocal minority claiming that anti-discrimination measures would somehow compromise safety or efficiency. Social media reflected this polarization, though the viral nature of the original incident had created a powerful narrative advantage for the reform movement. The hashtag #Harrington Standards trended consistently, with passengers sharing their own experiences of discrimination and celebrating companies that implemented equitable practices. Later that evening, at a strategy session with key allies, Olivia reflected on the day's testimony. "We're making progress, but the opposition is growing more organized," she observed. Daniels is building a coalition of executives who see these reforms as threats to their authority, rather than improvements to their business. Maria Ramirez, now leading SkyWest's passenger dignity program, while completing her nursing degree, offered a different perspective. "But the frontline employees are increasingly with us," she reported. The Flight Attendants Union officially endorsed the Transportation Equity Act today. They're tired of being forced to enforce discriminatory policies that make them complicit in harm. Victoria Wilson, who had become a surprisingly effective advocate for reform, added her insights. "The executives opposing these changes have never experienced the conflict between corporate metrics and human dignity," she explained. "They've never had to choose between keeping their job and treating people with respect. They don't understand the pressure they create with their policies." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to make that conflict visible, not just through statistics, but through stories. Stories that connect the boardroom decisions to real human experiences." The strategy that emerged combined policy advocacy with personal narrative, pairing each proposed regulation with examples of how existing practices harmed both passengers and employees. As the meeting concluded, Janet handed Olivia a message. Richard Daniels had requested a private meeting. "He's feeling the pressure," Janet suggested. Transamerican stock dropped 3% after his testimony today. Shareholders are questioning whether his opposition to reforms is becoming a liability. Olivia considered the request. "Set it up. Maybe there's room for finding common ground." Though exhausted from the day's confrontations, she felt cautiously optimistic. The resistance was substantial, but so was the momentum for change. Systems didn't transform easily or without conflict, but they did transform when enough people demanded better. Outside the window, the Capitol dome glowed in the evening light, a reminder that institutional change had always required both insiders and outsiders, both pressure and persuasion, both confrontation and conversation. The work continued on multiple fronts, with growing allies and determined opposition, exactly as meaningful change had always occurred. Olivia Harrington's alarm chimed at 5:00 a.m., pulling her from a dream about her father. They had been walking through an airport together, him in his old Air Force uniform, her in her business suit, passengers of all backgrounds moving freely around them. The dream lingered as she prepared for the day one that would mark 6 months since the incident on Flight 823. 6 months of battles, breakthroughs, exhaustion, and unexpected allies. 6 months that had transformed not just SkyWest Airlines, but potentially the entire transportation industry. As she sipped her coffee, Olivia scrolled through the morning news, her eye caught by a headline: SkyWest reports record customer satisfaction amid industry transformation. The article detailed findings from the just-released quarterly discrimination report, a transparent accounting that was now required reading for the board, shareholders, and the public. Discrimination. Complaints down 83% across all SkyWest operations. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers, up 52%. Employee bias training completion rate at 99.7%. Passenger rights app, downloaded by 1.3 million users. Stock price, up 27% from its post-incident low. She should have felt only triumph. Instead, A complex mix of emotions washed over her pride in the progress, certainly, but also a bone-deep weariness from the constant battles. The personal costs had been substantial. Her phone buzzed with a reminder therapy appointment at 6:00 a.m. Another change in her life, recognizing that leading a corporate revolution required emotional support, not just strategic planning. The external changes are remarkable, Dr. Bennett had observed in their last session. But what about your internal landscape? What's happening with Olivia? The person, not just Olivia the chairperson. It was a question she still struggled to answer. The past 6 months had been all-consuming, leaving little space for personal relationships or self-care. Her friendship with Zoe had become sporadic text messages. Her dating life, already limited, had disappeared entirely. Even her small pleasures, piano playing, Saturday morning runs, mystery novels, had been sacrificed to the cause. At the office, by 7:00 a.m., Olivia was reviewing preparations for the day's all-hands meeting when Janet Parker arrived with last-minute updates. "The leadership team is ready in the conference room," Janet reported. "And Victoria Wilson just called. She's in the building early, wants to know if you have a moment before the meeting." Olivia nodded. "Send her in." Victoria entered looking remarkably transformed from the woman who had slapped Olivia 6 months earlier. The harsh makeup and severe hairstyle were gone, replaced by a natural appearance that somehow made her seem younger despite the increased gray in her hair. More significantly, the desperate aggression had vanished. In its place was a quiet confidence, born of genuine growth rather than fear-based authority. "Good morning, Ms. Harrington," Victoria began. "I wanted to share something before the meeting." She handed Olivia a folder containing letters from flight crews across the SkyWest network, each describing their personal journey through the reform process. "At first, there was massive resistance," Victoria explained. "People felt attacked, blamed, scapegoated. But as we worked through the training, something shifted. Crew members started sharing their own stories, times they'd witnessed discrimination, but felt powerless to intervene, pressure they'd felt to enforce unwritten rules about who belonged in premium cabins." Olivia leafed through the letters, struck by their honesty. "I always knew something was wrong with how we profiled passengers, but I needed this job too much to speak up. The training helped me recognize biases I didn't know I had. I'm a better flight attendant now, and a better human being. For the first time in my career, I feel like I'm truly serving all passengers, not just protecting some from others." Victoria continued. "The turning point for most people was the data. When crew members saw the actual statistics, the overwhelming evidence that passengers of color were being treated differently, denial became impossible." She paused, meeting Olivia's gaze directly. "You could have just fired us all and started fresh. Instead, you gave us a chance to grow, to be part of the solution. That's real leadership." Olivia was momentarily at a loss for words. After months of resistance, criticism, and political battles, this simple acknowledgement of the human impact touched her deeply. "Thank you for sharing this, Victoria," she finally managed. "It means more than you know." The all-hands meeting that followed brought together department heads, project leaders, and civil rights advisors who had been implementing the 7-point plan. The conference room buzzed with energy as team members shared updates. The Office of Passenger Equity had reviewed 847 historical discrimination complaints and provided compensation to 612 affected passengers. The Passenger Rights app had facilitated real-time resolution of 73 potential incidents before they escalated to removals or complaints. Crew training had been completely redesigned around objective behavioral standards rather than subjective assessments of who looked suspicious. Executive compensation was now directly tied to equity metrics, creating financial incentives for leaders to prioritize fair treatment. Not all news was positive, however. The chief financial officer spoke candidly about ongoing challenges. "We're facing significant pushback from certain institutional investors who view the reforms as politically motivated rather than business necessary. 3 board members have privately expressed concerns about the scope and cost of the initiatives." Olivia wasn't surprised. Resistance was inevitable. Change of this magnitude always faces opposition. How should we respond? The CFO asked. With data, Olivia replied. Our stock price is up 27% since implementing these reforms. Customer loyalty metrics are at an all-time high. Employee retention has improved dramatically. The business case is as compelling as the moral one. Victoria spoke up from her position at the table. If I may, the most powerful tool we have is storytelling. The executives who resist these changes need to hear directly from passengers who've experienced discrimination. They need to understand the human cost, not just the financial implications. The meeting continued with detailed planning for the next phase of reforms. As it concluded, Olivia had a significant announcement. Today marks an important milestone in our transformation. The Department of Transportation has selected SkyWest's reformed policies as the new industry benchmark. The Harrington standards will serve as the template for new federal regulations on passenger treatment across all airlines. The team applauded enthusiastically. What had begun as a crisis had evolved into leadership. Later that evening, alone in her office, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. The external transformation was well underway with systems and structures to sustain it. But her internal landscape remained a battlefield of exhaustion, isolation, and purpose at the expense of personhood. She pulled out her phone and called Zoe, not to text, but to actually talk. Livy, her friend, answered, surprise evident in her voice. An actual phone call. Should I check for flying pigs? Olivia laughed, the sound foreign to her own ears. I was thinking maybe a weekend away. Just us. No laptops. No corporate revolutions, like we used to do. I thought you'd never ask. Zoe replied warmly. I've missed my friend. I've missed her too, Olivia admitted. I think it's time she came back. As she ended the call, Olivia felt something shift inside her. A recognition that changing systems from within didn't require sacrificing her whole self to the cause. Her father's wings pin sat on her desk, catching the evening light. She picked it up, remembering not just his fight for justice, but also his insistence on joy, connection, and wholeness, even amid the struggle. The corporate transformation would continue, but perhaps her personal transformation could now begin as well. 1 year after the incident on Flight 823, the key participants had followed remarkably different paths, each one shaped by that pivotal confrontation in ways none could have anticipated. Victoria Wilson stood backstage at a major airline industry conference, reviewing her notes one final time before her keynote address. The past year had transformed her from flight attendant to influential advocate, speaking candidly about how corporate pressure and personal bias had warped her judgment. 3 minutes, Ms. Wilson, a production assistant, informed her. Victoria nodded, straightening her simple navy blazer, so different from the severe uniform she'd once worn as armor. Her hands trembled slightly with pre-speech nerves, but there was a newfound confidence beneath the anxiety. On stage, the moderator introduced her. Our next speaker has an extraordinary story of transformation. 1 year ago, Victoria Wilson was at the center of a viral video showing her discriminating against and physically assaulting an airline passenger who turned out to be the company's owner. Today, she leads industry-wide training on bias recognition and prevention. As Victoria took the podium, she scanned the audience of airline executives, regulators, and industry professionals. She had expected hostility, especially from those who viewed her as a traitor to operational traditions. Instead, she saw curiosity, attentiveness, perhaps even respect. Thank you, she began simply. A year ago, I stood in a first-class cabin and made a split-second judgment based entirely on appearance. I saw a black woman in casual clothing and automatically assumed she didn't belong. That assumption and my actions that followed changed everything. She shared honestly about the pressures that had shaped her behavior, the performance metrics rewarding fraud detection, the subtle messaging about which passengers deserved scrutiny, the fear of job loss that had silenced her conscience. I'm not here to excuse my actions, she clarified. I'm here to expose the system that encouraged them. a system many of you still operate under different names and policies. The corporate executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the usual industry presentation filled with jargon and platitudes. This was raw accountability that implicated everyone in the room. Victoria had discovered an unexpected gift in the aftermath of her public disgrace, freedom from pretense. Having faced the worst professional humiliation imaginable, she no longer feared speaking uncomfortable truths. Every airline represented in this room has policies that intentionally or not result in disparate treatment based on race, religion, or perceived economic status. She continued, "You call them security protocols or fraud prevention or passenger management. Your employees call them what they really are: profiling systems that force good people to make bad decisions." Her book, The High Cost of Silence: How Corporate Culture Enables Discrimination, had become required reading in business schools nationwide. What began as personal atonement had evolved into structural critique and advocacy for worker protections that enabled ethical decision-making. Meanwhile, across the country in Los Angeles, Thomas Reynolds supervised baggage handling operations at LAX, a significant demotion from his previous management position. His initial bitterness had gradually given way to a different perspective as he worked alongside the diverse ground crew he had previously managed from a distance. "Reynolds, we need you at Carousel 3, came a call over his radio. "We've got a situation." He hurried to the baggage claim area where a heated exchange was underway between a baggage handler and a passenger. "This gentleman is claiming we damaged his luggage," the handler explained. "But it's clearly pre-existing wear." Reynolds noted that the passenger was a middle-aged black man in casual attire. 1 year earlier, he would have automatically sided with his employee against the passenger. Now he looked more carefully. "Sir, could you show me the damage you're concerned about?" he asked respectfully. The passenger pointed to a torn corner of his suitcase. "This was brand new. I just purchased it yesterday." Reynolds examined the damage carefully, noting the fresh tear and exposed interior. "You're absolutely right, sir. This is clearly recent damage. We'll process a claim immediately and provide a replacement suitcase from our inventory for your immediate needs." The baggage handler looked surprised. "But the policy says..." "The policy says we take responsibility when we damage passengers' property," Reynolds interrupted firmly. "And we treat every claim with equal consideration regardless of who's making it." His transformation hadn't been immediate or complete. There were still moments when old biases surfaced, when he caught himself making assumptions based on appearance. But working directly with passengers and a diverse staff had gradually shifted his perspective in ways that sensitivity training alone never could. Later in the break room, a young handler approached him. "You've really changed. You know that..." The old Reynolds would have shut that down in a second. Thomas nodded soberly. "The old Reynolds was part of the problem. I'm trying to be part of the solution now." He still carried regrets, opportunities lost, relationships damaged, a career derailed. But he had also found unexpected satisfaction in direct service, rather than metrics management. His worth as a person had gradually detached from his corporate title, allowing him to develop a more grounded identity. Maria Ramirez's journey had taken perhaps the most dramatic turn. As head of SkyWest's Passenger Dignity program, she had implemented training protocols that were now being adopted industry-wide. Her nursing studies, fully funded by a SkyWest scholarship, established after the incident, were nearly complete. Today, she stood before a class of new flight attendants conducting their first day of training. "Welcome to SkyWest Airlines," she began. "Before we discuss safety procedures or service protocols, we're going to talk about the foundation of everything we do: human dignity." She played the now famous video from Flight 823, a difficult but necessary starting point for every new employee. 1 year ago, this incident transformed our company and our industry. It exposed a culture of discrimination that had been normalized through policy and practice. Today, we begin your training by asking, what would you have done in this situation? The room fell silent as new trainees confronted the uncomfortable question. It's easy to say you would have intervened. Maria continued. But the reality of power dynamics, job security concerns, and normalized bias makes that intervention much harder than it appears. That's why our first training module focuses on creating a culture where speaking up is not just permitted, but expected. Her own journey from frightened probationary employee to industry leader exemplified the transformation possible when individuals were given the support and authority to act according to their conscience. Olivia Harrington's personal journey had been equally profound, though less visible to the public. After 6 months of all-consuming focus on corporate reform, she had recognized the need for personal balance, not just for her well-being, but for the sustainability of the changes she sought to create. Today, she sat in her Chicago apartment playing Bach on the baby grand piano that had gathered dust for months after Flight 823. The music flowed through her fingers, releasing tension she hadn't realized she still carried. Zoe lounged nearby, flipping through a magazine. Their weekend getaways had become a monthly ritual, sacred time away from corporate responsibilities where Olivia could simply be herself. "You know what I noticed yesterday?" Zoe commented casually. "You laughed. Like, actually laughed. Not that professional chuckle you do at board meetings." Olivia smiled, continuing to play. "I forgot how to do that for a while." The revolution was eating its children, Zoe observed, or at least one particular child. Dramatic as always, Olivia teased, but the observation held truth. She had nearly lost herself in the cause, sacrificing joy, connection, and wholeness to the all-consuming work of institutional change. The past year had taught her that sustainable transformation required both institutional and personal change, that systems were comprised of people who needed to remain human even while fighting inhuman structures. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Just finished keynote. Standing ovation." Even trans-American executives asked questions afterward. "Change is happening." Olivia texted back. "Proud of you. Now turn off your phone and enjoy the rest of the conference. The revolution can wait until Monday." She set her own phone aside, returning to Bach. The corporate transformation would continue, but her personal transformation, reclaiming joy, nurturing relationships, honoring her whole self, was equally important work. It was, she reflected, exactly what her father would have wanted for her. 18 months after the incident on Flight 823, Olivia Harrington found herself once again boarding a SkyWest flight in casual attire, worn jeans, a simple t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. This time, however, she wasn't conducting an undercover inspection. She was simply traveling home after a speaking engagement, choosing to experience the airline as an ordinary passenger would. Flight 823. The same flight number, though a different aircraft and crew was preparing for departure to Chicago. As Olivia approached the first-class cabin, she observed a young black man in a hoodie and jeans being welcomed by the lead flight attendant. "Good morning, Mr. Taylor. Welcome aboard. Would you like help with your carry-on?" The simple interaction, professional, respectful, without a hint of suspicion or additional scrutiny, represented exactly the transformation Olivia had fought to achieve. Not special treatment, just equal dignity, regardless of appearance. Olivia took her seat in 2A, the same position she had occupied during the confrontation 18 months earlier. As she settled in, she discreetly touched the small wings pin affixed to her collar, her father's legacy, and her constant reminder of purpose. The cabin filled steadily. A diverse mix of passengers moved through, first-class executives in suits, tourists in casual wear, travelers of various ethnicities and backgrounds. Each received the same professional greeting, the same assumption of belonging. As she observed the routine boarding process, Olivia reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. The battles had been numerous and often brutal. Trans-American Airlines, under CEO Richard Daniels, had fought the regulatory changes with everything from lobbying to lawsuits. Board members had threatened resignations. Industry associations had published scathing critiques of the Harrington standards. But alongside the resistance came unexpected allies. The Flight Attendants Union had become a powerful advocate for reform, recognizing that discriminatory policies harmed staff as well as passengers. Consumer rights organizations had mobilized their members to support the Transportation Equity Act. Even competitors had begun adopting SkyWest's approach, as customers voted with their wallets for airlines that guaranteed dignified treatment. Most significantly, a new generation was entering the workforce with different expectations, demanding accountability from employers and refusing to participate in systems that enabled discrimination. Ms. Harrington. Olivia looked up to find Maria Ramirez standing beside her seat, now wearing the uniform of a purser, the head flight attendant position she had earned through her exemplary service and leadership. "I didn't realize you were on this flight," Maria said warmly. "It's good to see you. I decided to experience the results of our work firsthand," Olivia explained. "No advance notice, no special treatment." Maria smiled. "In that case, welcome aboard Flight 823. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" As Maria moved on to other passengers, Olivia noticed a middle-aged white woman in the aisle giving a suspicious glance toward the young man in the hoodie. For a moment, it seemed the old biases might resurface. But then, something remarkable happened. The woman caught herself, her expression shifting from suspicion to self-awareness. Olivia recognized the small pin on the woman's lapel, the passenger dignity emblem that hundreds of thousands of travelers had adopted as a silent pledge to recognize and confront bias in public spaces. It was a small moment invisible to most, but Olivia understood its significance. The woman had not just suppressed a biased thought. She had recognized it and actively corrected her own thinking. That internal shift, multiplied across millions of interactions daily, represented the deeper transformation beyond policy changes and public pledges. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning. This is Captain Rodriguez. Welcome aboard SkyWest. Flight 823 to Chicago. We're looking at clear skies all the way, with an on-time arrival expected at O'Hare." As the aircraft began to taxi, Olivia's phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. "Dinner tonight. That new Thai place on Michigan Avenue." "Absolutely," she typed back. "Work talk banned. Only dessert and gossip allowed." Another text arrived, this one from Victoria. "Speaking at 3 more airlines this month. The movement keeps growing. Thank you for the second chance that made it possible." The young man in the hoodie caught Olivia's eye and nodded slightly in recognition. He didn't need to say anything. His presence in first class, unremarkable and unchallenged, spoke volumes about how much had changed. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Olivia closed her eyes and felt her father's presence. "We did it, Daddy," she thought. "Not just change within the system, but transformation of the system itself." The plane lifted into the clear blue sky, and Olivia felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. Bias would continue to manifest in new ways. Resistance would evolve alongside progress. The transformation required ongoing vigilance and renewal. But Flight 823 had shown that meaningful change was possible, that systems could be transformed, that biases could be confronted, that dignity could become the standard rather than the exception. The aircraft banked gently toward Chicago, sunlight streaming through the windows. Olivia opened her eyes and took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to fully feel the victory of the moment. It wasn't just about policies or regulations or metrics. It was about that young man in the hoodie traveling without fear. It was about Maria leading with confidence rather than intimidation. It was about that woman with the pin catching and correcting her own bias. It was about human dignity preserved not through constant intervention, but through transformed expectations and systems. And that was a legacy worth building. 3 years after the incident on Flight 823, Olivia Harrington stood at a podium in the Grand Hall of Howard University, addressing the graduating class on a brilliant spring morning. The warm breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms, and the faces before her shone with hope and purpose. "When I was your age," she began, "I missed a scholarship interview because I was removed from a flight for causing trouble, which meant asking for the same service other passengers received. I couldn't prove what happened. No one recorded it. No one believed me." She paused, looking out at the sea of graduates' diverse faces, filled with the potential to transform their own corners of the world. Today, That incident would trigger what's now called a Harrington test, a simple question people ask themselves before making judgments based on appearance. Would I treat everyone this way, or am I applying different standards based on how someone looks? The term had entered everyday conversation, used in settings ranging from corporate boardrooms to elementary school classrooms. With this pass, the Harrington test had become shorthand for examining potential bias in decisions large and small. In the 3 years since Flight 823, the transformation that began in commercial aviation had expanded far beyond its original context. The Transportation Equity Act, signed into law 2 years earlier, had formalized anti-discrimination protections for travelers across all modes of transportation. Unlike previous civil rights legislation that focused primarily on punishing individual bad actors, this law addressed the systematic incentives and structures that enabled discrimination. The Harrington certification had become a recognized credential for businesses committed to equitable treatment, with over 15,000 companies across various sectors participating in the voluntary program. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and healthcare facilities now proudly displayed the certification alongside their other credentials. Victoria Wilson's training program had been adapted for diverse environments, from hospital emergency rooms to retail customer service, with measurable reductions in discriminatory incidents across all sectors. Most significantly, a new generation was entering professional life with fundamentally different expectations about dignity in public spaces. They had come of age in the post-Flight 823 era, where speaking up against discrimination was increasingly normalized rather than exceptional. But the most important change, Olivia continued, isn't visible in policy documents or training manuals or certification programs. It's the countless everyday interactions that unfold differently because we've collectively raised our standards for human dignity. She shared a story that illustrated this shift. Last month, I witnessed a scene in a hotel lobby that would have been unimaginable 3 years ago. A front desk agent began questioning a guest's reservation based solely on their casual attire. Before management could intervene, something remarkable happened. Other guests, strangers who had never met this person, spoke up immediately. "Are you applying the same standard to everyone?" one asked. "Would you question my reservation if I were dressed the same way?" asked another. The front desk agent recognized what was happening, apologized immediately, and corrected course. No viral videos, no corporate crisis, no federal investigation. Just everyday people applying the standards we've collectively established. As Olivia spoke, she noticed a familiar face in the faculty section. Dr. James Wilson, the elderly passenger who had been so condescending during the original incident. He had undergone his own transformation, establishing a foundation that provided scholarships for minority students entering fields where they were historically underrepresented. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded in acknowledgement. His journey from casual prejudice to active allyship exemplified the personal growth that institutional change made possible. After the ceremony, as graduates celebrated with family and friends, a young woman approached Olivia hesitantly. "Ms. Harrington, I'm sorry to interrupt your day, but I needed to thank you personally. My mother was removed from a flight 5 years ago for suspicious behavior, which meant reading a book in Arabic. The incident shattered her confidence. She stopped traveling altogether." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Last month, she flew for the first time since then to come see me graduate. The difference in how she was treated was everything. She felt human again." Olivia embraced her warmly. "Thank your mother for her courage. It takes tremendous strength to try again after being hurt." As Olivia left campus, her phone displayed a news alert. Trans-American Airlines announces adoption of full Harrington standards package. She smiled at the irony. Richard Daniels, who had fought the reform so vigorously, had finally surrendered to market reality. Customers were choosing airlines that guaranteed dignified treatment, making discrimination not just unethical, but unprofitable. In her car, Olivia touched the wings pin on her lapel, her father's legacy that had become a symbol recognized worldwide. Change from the inside, he had advised. That change had rippled outward beyond anything either of them could have imagined. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Pockets of resistance remained. New manifestations of bias emerged that required new responses. The work continued as it always would. But Flight 823 had forever altered expectations about what was acceptable in public spaces, creating a new baseline for human dignity that grew stronger with each passing year. As Olivia drove away from Howard University, her mind returned to a conversation with her father many years earlier. She had been 13, frustrated after experiencing discrimination at school, angry that nothing seemed to change despite decades of civil rights work. "Why do we keep fighting if nothing ever really changes?" she had demanded. Jackson Harrington had considered the question thoughtfully. "Things do change, Livy, just not all at once, and not without struggle." He had taken her to his study and shown her photographs from his youth. Segregated water fountains, whites-only signs, buses where black passengers were forced to the back. "Those aren't ancient history," he had explained. "That was my everyday reality. Now it's unimaginable to your generation. That's change. Not perfect change, not complete change, but real change that makes a difference in real lives." Now, 3 years after Flight 823, Olivia understood his wisdom more deeply than ever. The transformation she had helped create wasn't perfect or complete, but it was real, making a difference in countless lives every day. As she stopped at a traffic light, she noticed a family in the car beside her parents and 2 young children, all wearing T-shirts with the passenger dignity emblem. They weren't activists or corporate leaders, just ordinary people who had embraced a new standard of mutual respect. That was the true measure of lasting change, when values moved beyond policies and procedures to become part of everyday culture, embraced not through enforcement, but through collective recognition of shared humanity. The light turned green, and Olivia continued her journey, thinking about all the people who had made this transformation possible. Victoria Wilson, who had found redemption through honest confrontation with her own biases. Maria Ramirez, who had transformed from frightened silence to powerful advocacy. Dr. Wilson, who had evolved from condescension to genuine allyship. And countless others, whose names would never make headlines, but whose everyday choices to speak up, to question assumptions, to demand better collectively created the conditions for lasting change. 3 years earlier, in the aftermath of that confrontation on Flight 823, Olivia had wondered if sustainable transformation was truly possible. Now she had her answer, not in perfect victory, but in meaningful progress that continued to unfold in ways she could never have predicted. Her father had been right. Systems do change, not all at once, and not without struggle. But they do change when enough people decide that better is possible and necessary. And that change begins not with grand declarations or perfect solutions, but with one person in one moment choosing dignity over discrimination, courage over comfort, and accountability over indifference. That was the legacy of Flight 823. A legacy that continued to unfold in countless interactions across a society learning, however imperfectly, to see each other more clearly and treat each other more humanely. A legacy of transformation from the inside out. If this story moved you, please hit that like button right now. Your support helps us continue to share these powerful stories of transformation and justice. Subscribe to our channel to never miss another eye-opening video like this one, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when we upload. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because change happens one person at a time. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with discrimination or a time when you stood up for what's right. Remember, we can all be agents of change in our own communities. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.